My name is Max, and my uncle is a vampire. I found out about it not so long ago, and to be honest, I was completely blown away. I didn't believe there were such people as vampires before, but that's what happened. Now, I'll tell you about my uncle and how I found out about him. My uncle's name is Ted, and he's my father's twin, but we only met recently. The thing is, my parents met while they were living in North Carolina. They were married there. My dad had a close relationship with his twin brother, Uncle Ted. They played together almost all the time, went to the same class, to the same parties. It was only when they were older that my father began to notice that his health was getting worse and worse. His parents and him couldn't understand what was wrong, what they just did not do, and ran to doctors and psychologists, and even went to psychics. But nothing helped. When they were teenagers, and it was time to meet girls, my dad beat Uncle Ted's records, although they were very similar. For some reason, the girls were more attracted to my father. Uncle Ted would get mad, and at the moment, my father would get sick. He would get sick right away, and he would get terrible pimples, or whatever. It was a mystery my father couldn't solve until something crucial happened in their lives. On one of the failed dates, Uncle Ted came home so upset that he took all of his anger out on my father, and he immediately became ill. Dad said that was when he realized that his brother was his energy vampire, maybe because they're twins, so they have a powerful bond. Who knows? In general, my father left his father's house immediately after the wedding with my mother. My mother didn't understand the rush, and my father didn't really tell me what was going on. He didn't want to tell anyone that he was leaving town just because of his brother. Who would believe that a bad luck streak only follows him when his brother is around? So he decided to go away and try to live without him. And he was amazed. But things really got better. Upon arrival in a new place, Dad was immediately offered a job. They rented a small but super cozy house. They lived well and provided for themselves. Everything was fine, and then my mom got pregnant. The news pleased the family, grandparents. Of course, Uncle Ted found out about it, and of course, they talked with their father, just not so often anymore. Uncle Ted was happy to have a nephew or niece and made a surprise visit for Christmas after what he had heard. He was like snow on the head. My parents absolutely did not expect him, especially my father. They met him with a tight smile and the hope that he had hitchhiked, which they were very much mistaken about. Uncle Ted is a straight man, and he immediately asked where he was going to sleep this week. Mom and Dad were surprised, but they didn't send him away. That night, my father went down to drink water at night, slipped on the floor, and fell, hitting the switch with his foot. The lights went out all over the house. The next day, when the electrician came, my father said that he had had to go to work. Uncle Ted asked to go with him, and they were back in half an hour because Dad spilled coffee on himself. I looked at him, but there was no face on him. I said, "Did he stay up all night?" But Dad said that he was just sleeping and had a good night's sleep. I didn't understand anything, so they left. Uncle Ted was a great uncle, but with his cockroaches. In his opinion, we should support him, but my mother and I did not understand why. Out of respect for my father, we didn't say anything. But when my father came home, he looked even more outdated than in the morning. This went on for another week, and when my father looked more like a dead man, my mother took him to a cafe, where she openly asked what was wrong. When he's around, I dry up. Things are going badly, and in general, I feel bad myself, my father finally said. That same day, my mother packed up his things, politely but urgently asked him to leave the house. She said that she was not ready to receive guests at the moment. He was offended by my father. He left, and they didn't talk for years. My dad missed him a lot, but he knew that their meeting would turn out badly for him, so he chose family and happiness. So the years passed. I was born. I didn't even know Dad had a brother, much less a twin. I grew up and went to school. Everything was going well, until one day, I noticed my father in one of the stores. He looked strange. In a not very clean shirt, jeans, he stole food from the market, and a can of beer. I couldn't believe my eyes. How so? I immediately went up to him and told him to put everything back, but he looked at me in surprise and said, "Boy, go for a walk. This is none of your business." I even thought that Dad was cracking up, and then I saw that he was really going to rob the store. I went up behind him and pulled out a beer from under his shirt, and the salesman noticed and called the police. We were taken to the police station. There I sat and argued that it was my father, and he kept claiming that it was the first time he'd ever seen me. Then I asked him to call my mother, and then both my parents came in. "Wait a minute," I said, pausing for a moment. "Hi, Ted. I see you've already met my son," Dad said to the man next to me. Only then did I learn of its existence. My father bailed him out and brought him home. They had a long conversation there. We found out that Uncle Ted wasn't living very well, that he didn't have a job or a family, and that his whole life had gone downhill after he and his mother had kicked him out of the house. I suddenly felt so sorry for him that I didn't even know how to help, even though I wanted to do it madly. Uncle Ted looked at my mother and me, the house, and the dog, and said he was so happy for my brother. Then he burst into tears. "Why did you do this to me? You're my only native person. What have I done to you?" he asked my father. I saw my father blush with shame. After a short pause, he finally admitted what the reason was. Then he heard Uncle Ted's wild laugh. He said that all his life he thought the opposite, that the vampire was my father, and that's why he's not doing well. Who even came up with this energy vampire? I asked myself. He stayed with us that day. He and father talked until morning. We found out that my uncle really had a difficult life. After leaving our house, he went to look for a job, but he was not accepted anywhere as a security guard or a dishwasher. He was sure it was his brother's anger. "I was also offended by you all these years, but I couldn't help it. You sent me away," he told his brother. And then they tried living together, and you know what? They both turned out to be like that. This time, my mother and I tested it for ourselves. After communicating with him, it immediately seems that the life has been sucked out of you. In fact, this terrible wild feeling of fatigue almost knocks you down. So my mother and I decided to communicate with them separately. But for now, let them drink each other's blood.
My name is Hannah, and I recently saw my father's true identity and was amazed. It turns out that he was not who he claimed to be all these years. Now I'm not sure I love him. I'm more afraid. The fact is that not so long ago, my parents divorced, and I chose my father so that he would not be lonely. I knew that my mother was strong and she would survive the divorce, especially since it was her initiative. But my father, I was worried about him because he was always not independent, vulnerable. Even though he was in the police, when he came home, he took off his uniform and became my daddy. As for the divorce, their relationship had not been going well for a long time. I couldn't bear to listen to the daily scandals and threats. I couldn't stand it, so I picked up another broken plate and told them to get a divorce. I don't know about your patience, but mine is broken. They both froze, looked at me, and realized that it was finally time to talk to their child. We sat down at the table, but I did the most talking. I was old enough to know that part of the reason they put up with each other was because of me. But I said it was okay. "Mom, I'll stay with my dad. No offense, but I'm worried about him." My mother argued for a long time and said that it would be better for me to be with her, but I insisted on my own. When my father heard about my offer, he was very surprised and happy. I've been thinking it over for a long time. It's better for everyone. Immediately after the divorce, my mother went to another country. She promised to come to me for all the holidays, which suited me. To be honest, I was closer to my father. My mother often went somewhere and we were alone, ordering pizza, my favorite snacks, and a lot of soda. The best nights were to eat in front of the TV until late at night. That was my thing with Dad. So when they got divorced, it didn't seem so bad. My dad and I sold the house and moved into an apartment. Just like before, my dad came home very late, and I was already asleep. I took care of the household chores, cleaning, washing, and some cooking. My father wasn't fussy, and sometimes he and his fellow police officers didn't have time to eat at all. So they caught criminals on an empty stomach. It was dangerous work. He was often catching the bad people, an environment which is always dreaming of revenge. The attackers found out that my parents were divorced, and I was left at home alone. As usual, unsuspecting, I ate my supper and went to bed. Already in a deep sleep, I thought I heard rustling in the apartment. I thought it was my dad coming home from work. Before I could really open my eyes, someone bumped into me, closing my mouth with such force that I couldn't move my mouth. Masked men tied my hands and feet in seconds. I was terrified and panicked, ready to scream with all my might. I thought I was going to die. My blood froze with fear, and I had a million thoughts about being killed. I prayed to God that my father would come home soon. There were 3 outsiders. They searched and turned over the whole house. Apparently, they thought that the necessary thing was stored here, but they did not know that my father did not bring anything home from work to avoid such situations. The masked men took everything of value. I was shaking and crying with horror, and they decided to take me with them before they left. My body resisted, and my temperature rose with anger. The bastards didn't care that I was a teenager. With my mouth tied, I couldn't call for help. I wish Dad would come soon, I thought for the last time. And suddenly, I saw one of the bandits fall to the floor. The second gets a foot in the face. It was my father. He's here. My eyes were still streaming with tears, but I felt a sharp sense of relief. I had no doubt that my father would save me. In a matter of minutes, he had 3 of them down. At this time, I had managed to free my hands and mouth. I sat on the floor and breathed deeply, still unable to speak. 2 were unconscious. Dad went to the 3rd one and asked what they wanted. The bandit only spat in his face, which angered my father. Dad threw him to the floor and hit him in the face with all his fury. He was already unconscious. I think his nose was broken. His teeth were knocked out. There was blood everywhere, and Dad didn't stop. He beat and beat on the head with his fists. I shouted, "Dad, stop! Stop it! Enough! You'll kill him!" Then I ran to him, but he pushed me with a bloody hand so hard that my body flew away like a doll for several meters. There was a fire in my father's eyes, as if he had passed out and was being controlled by the devil himself. It was a terrible sight. I was even more terrified than when I was kidnapped. The 2 men came to their senses and tried to escape, but my father took out a rifle and shot it right in front of me in our house. Only then did he exhale and calm down. I've never seen such a monster in my life. I became afraid of him. He saw it and understood it. I didn't speak to him for about a week, and then he called me over to talk. "I know you're afraid of me. I'm sorry you saw all this. I didn't want to, but this is how I am at work. I am a police officer, and I have to fight crime. And here, the situation was doubly terrible. These bastards tried to take away my most valuable thing. You. I didn't want you to see dead people, and I didn't want you to know that your dad can kill. But I want you to know that when I'm eating pizza with you or watching cartoons, I'm real. I will never hurt you in my life, daughter. I'm still your dad," he said. Yes, I wanted to hear those words. I burst into tears and hugged him for the first time in so long. Then he said he couldn't risk my life, so he called my mother and told her everything. A minute later, she appeared on the doorstep. "I can't risk your life. My job is too dangerous. It will be better if you live with your mother, and I will visit you," he said. I felt sad. I didn't want to leave him, but I knew that he would feel much more confident knowing that his daughter was safe. So I didn't say anything and went to get my things. I gave him one last big hug, and he said I was the only one who made him better every day. Who knows? We're all not perfect. The father in the devil's guise was protecting his child. Can it be justly justified? Subscribe to this channel, because there are still many cool stories.